Hey everyone, welcome back to EverTune TV. I am still your host, Matt Blackett, and my guest today is Nashville session ace and all-around good guy, Jerry McPherson, who has recorded and performed with Faith Hill, Tim McGraw, Don Henley, Amy Grant, and way too many others to mention. Jerry, welcome to EverTune TV.
Good to see you, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
And so I want to talk about the Nashville scene because I've never done a session in Nashville, and I'm fascinated by the process. So can you talk me through a typical day, if there is such a thing, and what goes on in the course of making one of those great sounding records?
Well, there's not a typical day, but there kind of is. There's some givens, but there's a lot of misconceptions about how we record here. I don't know if you've ever seen a number chart. It's a skeletal chart. There's nothing written out really for anyone to play. It's just the chord structure, the song structure. We don't hear the song ahead of time. I mean, when you walk into a session, you're hearing it for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah, and so there's a lot going on, especially depending on the type of session you're doing. Like if it's a recording label deal, and we record in 3-hour sessions. So we start at 10 a.m. and we go to lunchtime, break at 1 p.m., go from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m., break, and then go from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. So somebody will say, hey, you have a 10 and a 2 open on the 22nd. So that's 10 and 2s and 6s. So that's how we do it. So
Okay.
if you're on a master recording session, if it's on a label deal, it's 1 or 2 songs in a 3-hour session, which is pretty quick when you realize what's at stake. Trying to make or break someone's career, or make or break a song. And then it can get more intense than that. 3 songs an hour. If you're doing what we'd call a developmental deal or a unsigned indie thing, somebody coming in from out of town who wants to record in Nashville, that can be 3-4 songs in a session, sometimes 5. And a publishing demo, that's 5 songs, sometimes 6.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so
3-hour session.
that's a 3-hour session. So I'm doing that math in my head here. That's 30 minutes per tune for songs that you've never heard before.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so from the guitar player standpoint, let's say you're doing a publishing demo and it's 6 songs. That's 2 passes of guitars on each song and probably a solo or a third pass of some sort in a 3-hour thing. So your head's spinning. You're ready for lunch. You're ready for a break at the end of that 3 hours, definitely. Yeah.
And from a guitar standpoint, what are you thinking about with that? Like once you've got the changes down and you know where you're going, you have a roadmap, then where does your head go in terms of your parts and what you're trying to create?
Well, number one, we're all listening to the vocal. If there's any kind of direction, a lot of times there's no direction given as far as style or anything. You kind of hear it in the song. But from a guitar player standpoint, you have to remember, we're trying to pull the listener through the song. We're trying to get them hooked at the top. So you'll do a hook guitar part a lot of times, especially if it's country. You'll come up with some kind of hook line that's not there on the demo, usually the work tape that we're listening to. So you got to fabricate that. Then you're trying to figure out, once the person has heard the intro, first verse and first chorus, it's like, they've basically heard the song. So second verse, we got to add something. And usually it's a rhythmic part or something just to kind of step up the energy. Like I say, you're trying to drag them through the song. You're trying to keep them entertained, the listener entertained for about 3.5 minutes. So the guitar player, as a guitar player, I'm trying to listen for the hook. I'm trying to listen for the second verse, trying to think about if there's a solo, what's the next bar after the solo, so you can stick the landing,
Right.
You're listening to the bridge, if there's a bridge section, I got to do something interesting, there's all these little devices that we as guitar players have to come up with. And here's the biggie. A lot of times on sessions in Nashville, it's one electric player. Sometimes there's two. There's quite a bit. There's two, but a lot of times I'm alone on a session. So you're having to decide to come up with a part that will complement and fill out with the next part. And the whole time, especially if it's somebody from out of town that they're not familiar with the process, they're like, well, I was hearing it bigger. It's like, yeah, the bigger part's coming in the second part. I'll do power chords in the second part. So you're trying to do the psychology of satisfying the singer, writer, artist, whoever that is, but have the parts make sense, you know? So you're kind of skipping around, like you'll play a hook at the top with no chords underneath it. Your second part will have the chords. In the choruses, you may play a little simple line or whatever. There's no chords. Or if you feel like it's a kind of a green artist and they can't see the big picture, you'll do more chordal stuff and switch off on some lines where they're going, well, it just seems empty. It's like, well, okay, I'll play some fills. We only have these hands that will double on another part and a third part. So it's a lot to think about. Sessions are hard.
No, that's a real balancing act. And again, you have a really clear sense of the arrangement on this and how it needs to build, but you have to see that all at once.
Yeah.
And again, this is a song you've never heard before. And so, I mean, that's a big ask as far as I can tell.
Well, it is, especially if you're with an artist who's written the song. It's their precious little egg. It's kind of like, oh, and they've been performing it for a few years, you know, and we're hearing it for the first time. We're usually talking while we're listening to the work tape. I've never figured that one out. And then you do a quick glancing blow on the song, but it ends up, it's kind of magical because you've got a room full of people, of guys and gals on their instruments that are incredible musicians. They've got big ears and they've got good hands. They've got a real song sense, so they can make suggestions as far as we're taking too long to get to the second chorus, or this needs a solo, or it doesn't need a solo, or let's cut the solo in half. Let's don't break down the last chorus. Let's plow through. Let's break down the outro. Let's don't break down the outro. You know, there's too many stops. There's too many tricks. Let's, you know, that's a biggie. People will come in and they've kind of, their work tape is a little overproduced, and we'll just some of that stuff out. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what about from a gear standpoint? Do you lug a ton of gear? Do you have a cartage company? I mean, what do you need for a session?
For a Nashville session, and things have changed. You know, budgets have, you know, gotten kind of scarce. Cartage is not what it used to be. I still keep, you know, cartage gear downtown in a locked warehouse, a secret location.
Okay.
But then also I'll bring in my own gear, and that's been a lot. You know, we do so much recording at home. Over the last few years, the home studios have been just the necessity. And then with the pandemic, it's the only way to do it. But now that we're getting back into sessions, you'll take your own gear a lot of times. Sometimes you'll have the recording, the cartage company bring your gear and charge it to the label, and the producer will let you know about that. So I've gotten used to decades of cartage, right? So with having a bunch of options. And usually you're not given any clue what you're doing that day ahead of time. Hey, can you do a 10 and a 2, you know, next Wednesday? Okay, that's the only info. You find out what the studio is, and that's it. You don't know if it's a female singer, a guy singer, if it's rock, country, pop, Christmas album. If you're, you know, it's amazing what you don't know walking in. So I tend to take a lot of gear just to save my butt. And especially, here's what's interesting. If it's a female singer, there's going to be a lot of flat or sharp keys, however you want to look at it. And one thing I hate doing, especially if you're moving fast, is trying to retune a guitar, especially a Strat with a floating bridge or something, and you're trying to do it a half step. you know, I bring in about 8 guitars.
Wow.
9. It's a lot to lug. I finally weighed, Matt, I finally weighed myself with my gear on the first walk-in, where I've got my matchless head, I've got my pedal board, and I've got a double gig bag on my back. I brought a pair of scales over a couple of weeks ago in my studio and weighed myself with that stuff and without that stuff. It's 100 pounds on the first walk-in into the studio.
Okay.
And that's just the first trip. So I tend to take more guitars than other guitar players do, because I would rather physically take in more guitars than slow the session up by trying to half step, you know, tune down guitars, you know, while everyone waits. So so okay. I'll take 9 guitars, pedal board, amp head, separate cabinet, and as much courage as possible.
Okay, good. That's good. Yeah, and then with that 100-pound first load in, I'm guessing you probably need to have a chiropractor on call as well, right?
No, you just learn to deal with the pain.
Okay, good. That makes for a more soulful performance sometimes too. You play through it. Well, you mentioned the home studios, and I wanted to ask you about a piece of gear that I believe is in your studio, and that's your mic mover.
Oh yeah.
And so I just saw a video where you were demonstrating that, and I find it fascinating. And so this is like a remote controlled robot arm with a microphone and a camera on it, so that you can experiment with different mic placements and hear the tonal changes from the control room. Is that right?
Yes. And come to find out, it's the best EQ in the world.
Okay.
Where a mic.
So you devised this system. So talk me through that. Like, how did that come to be? And
okay. So for years now, I've been doing presets for Native Instruments Guitar Rig. It's a great piece of software. And I use it along with old amps. You know, I'll use a 1966 Plexi 50-watt head that I've got over there, and I'll use Guitar Rig on the next track. You know, I just intersperse stuff. I love it all. So I got so used to the software being able to swap out cabinets, different microphones, and I thought, well, when I bought this house and to put in a studio, I thought, you know, it'd be nice to be able to have different combinations of microphones, or different placements of microphones, because that's the biggie. You know, just off the dust cap, a little bit further over to the edge, different things like that. So I thought, well, I'll put a ribbon on each one, and a dynamic, and then maybe a faraway mic or something. And I realized, okay, I've got 10 cabinets, that's 30 microphones. And I'm not going to do that, you know. And I've always had kind of a background in electromechanics and science. I love inventing stuff, you know. I hooked up solenoids on my old green tube echoplexes years ago, where with a foot switch I could engage the tape, turn it on and off on a gig. But I figured out, I started thinking, what if I only had one microphone, not 30, but one microphone? How could I get it around to all those cabinets? And I thought, maybe have it, you know, where all the cabinets are lined up beside each other and it scoots around. Then I remembered reading a Guitar Player magazine article on Billy Gibbons. And he said that when they were in the studio, they would build an amp cabin, which is basically a bunch of cabinets facing each other, and they'd stick a mic in the middle. And I thought, So I was like, so what I came up with is, in my amp room, I have 10 cabinets that are in a big circle. And in the middle are 2 big servo motors with an arm. I went to a machine shop and had a machine shop build a head for it, where I could put these microphone stands on it. So I have 3 mics, and I can control the X and the Y. I don't have the old Z, but what I do is, maybe I can illustrate this. If this were the face of the cabinet, so you have the mic doing this, what I do, I kick like if it's a 2x12, I kick the edge of the cabinet out a little bit, all right? So it ends up doing this. It gets further away from it. You have this to this. So close mic, and then about 6 inches away.
Okay.
So if at one cabinet, I can get close on one and far away on the other. And I've got a little keypad thing where I can store the presets where it fit, you know, where it sets on the cabinet. And so here's what I figured out is that if you were to take all these amp heads and run them through one cabinet, and we did this, the speaker sames out everything. The speaker is such a fingerprint. It's such a sonic fingerprint. It's a comb filter. It's this EQ, you know, plot that most amps, if you keep putting it through the same cabinet, they kind of sound the same. They pretty much sound the same. You could take one amp head and plug it into different cabinets and get totally different sounds.
Wow. Okay.
So, but I have, you know, 8 amp heads going into 8 cabinets, and then 2 dedicated combo amps, an old Tweed Champ and then a Tweed Deluxe. So that way, all my overdubs, all the sounds don't end up loading on top of each other. They get their distinctive places. And I love recording like that. You know, it's like doing power, I'll move the mic over on my second pass of power when I double. And just those little variances really widen stuff out. And I got to work with an engineer who recorded a bunch of AC/DC records. And he said every overdub, every guitar part that you hear on those AC/DC records gets its own miking, its own placement. So there's a historical, you know, backing on me on this. So it's a great way to record, and I use it all the time. Love it. And I ended up getting I got a US patent on it too.
Oh, cool. Oh, good for you. Yeah, well, I haven't mic'd an amp in quite a while, but when I used to do it, I realized I wasn't great at micing amps, and it was the toughest thing to do, because especially if it was in the other room, you would go in there, place the mic, get back in the control room. It's not right. Go in there, move it, but you don't know where you're moving it to necessarily. For you can just sweep it, and almost like tuning a string, you can find the spot where that's the sound you want out of that amp and just freeze it right there.
Yeah, that's the concept. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay. Very cool. All right. Well, on the subject of very clever gear, you've got this crazy bridge on some of your guitars. It's called the EverTune bridge.
Yes, I do.
So what did you think the first time you tried that, and how do you like using that technology in the studio and live?
Well, this was so funny. My first experience, the first time I saw an EverTune bridge, I was playing with Faith Hill, and we were doing an award show, a TV award show. I can't remember what it was. And they flew in from Los Angeles. It was in Nashville, so it would have been a country awards thing, you know, like an ACM or CMAs, one of those CMAs, I think. And they flew in a guitar player from LA, David Levita. Great guitar player, and he's a great friend now. I just met him that first time. And he flew in and opens this guitar case, and it's a 335 with an EverTune bridge on it. And I was like, okay. And I looked at his pedal board, and there was no tuner on the pedal board. And I was like, so how do you tune? He goes, oh, I don't really have to. And I was like, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. You're a guitar player. You have to tune. You spend half your time tuning and the other half being out of tune. So here's what was funny is that when he pulled the guitar out, it was ice cold because it had been sitting in a warehouse. And he just pulled it out, put it on, boom, and we were in for sound check. And it was perfectly in tune. I was like, okay, dude, we got to talk. So that was my first experience. So he got me into trying it out. I have a Les Paul that was in the flood of 2010, kind of split the top a little bit, but I got the top redone and everything by Glaser Instruments. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, well, this would be a good guitar to try the EverTune bridge out on. And it was, and it ended up, there's a lot of routing that takes place in it. So I was afraid of that, as far as how's it going to sound afterwards. It sounded like my guitar, except in tune.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. And you have a lot of guitars, but do you typically bring an EverTune guitar or two to these sessions that you just described?
So these sessions, I always bring, all right, right now I have 3 guitars with EverTune bridges. I have my Les Paul, I have a Fender Telecaster. The Telecaster I got for a Tim McGraw tour. We went to play a set of dates in Australia, and a lot of them were outdoors. So I thought, hey, this is working out so well on my Les Paul, I'll try a Tele, and took it out on the road and loved it. What's funny is that guitar techs, if they haven't experienced the EverTune, they don't like to be rocked that much. They like rock, but they don't like to be rocked with new gear, and they can be kind of, and we're like, no. EverTune's good. It's gonna be fun. It's like Frankenstein and fire. But what's funny is that once they get the hang of it and they realize, oh, okay, this is how I string it up. One of their biggest nightmares for a guitar tech is to hand an out-of-tune guitar to a guitar player.
Sure.
And now they know that, here you go. I haven't even checked it. There you go. So guitar techs love them. Once they finally experience them, they're like, you're going to sound great up there. You're going to sound totally in tune, and you're going to make your guitar tech look good too. So I have that Tele, and then I have a Fender Jaguar.
Nice.
So for every session, I at least take the Les Paul and the Jaguar, the Fender Jaguar. The Les Paul I'll keep in standard tuning. The Tele I'll keep in half-step tuning. And if I know there's going to be a female singer that day, I'll take the Tele. The Jaguar I take for the whole step down. And so whole step down, if the song's in B flat, I can play it out of a C. If it's an F, I can play it out of a G. It's just a good way to get it around some of these keys, And one thing I want to get back to about the Tele, taking it on the road, there was a song on Tim, when I came out on Tim's show in standard tuning, and then it segued right into a drop D, kind of country song. What I would do is I would tune the guitar with a drop D, and then tune the low E string back up to the E, play the first part of the show, and then when it's time to do the drop D, I just didn't even have to mess with it, didn't even have to figure out what tuning was on it.
Right.
Just perfectly in tune. The other thing was that there was a song where I had to capo, and putting a capo on a guitar live. It's just with the EverTune, it's just like bam. It could be or
it could be crooked. It could. You don't have to get it perfectly right behind the fret.
That didn't matter. Yeah, and then when you're done, you throw it off and you're back. So, but I find myself taking at least 2 EverTune guitars to sessions, because remember I was telling you how fast we move here. Mm-hmm. What'll happen is that usually you get a track within the first or second take, and then the drummer says, "Okay, I'm going to do a tambourine part." The keyboardist hits a button, says, "Oh yeah, I'll do a synth part," or he'll turn and grab the B3, and then the acoustic player go, "I'll double," and so it leaves the guitar player either scrambling for a different guitar and tuning it up, or just reaching over, grabbing an EverTune guitar and just going, "Let's go," So it has sped up the workflow for me, where now instead of me having to think about, is this in tune, or am I going to spoil this take because the tuning was a little gamey? I just know it's going to be rock solid, and I can just concentrate on the part. And when you know that your gear, the gear has to keep up with the pace of the session, right?
Yep.
So when I know that, I'm confident the way my gear sounds, the way it's playing, the way it feels, and the fact that it's in tune, it's like you can totally just concentrate on making the song better. So
that's right.
Yeah.
I had a producer tell me one time that and it's an interesting metaphor, but it works, that it reminds him of like a digital piano. And by that, he meant a person who plays a digital piano they never think about their tuning. They sit down and they create. That's all they do.
Yeah.
And it's an incredible amount of freedom that you get from that, to not have to worry about it, and you don't waste the time, you don't lose the inspiration. But the Jaguar you're talking about, that's interesting, because my very first good guitar was a Jag, and so I have a soft spot for that instrument. But that's a short scale instrument, right? Isn't it like a 24-inch scale? And tuning it down a full step would be almost impossible without an EverTune bridge on it.
Yeah, it definitely. Well, and I've done live TV shows with my Les Paul tuned down a whole step. An unwound G tuned down a whole step, down to an F on a Les Paul on live TV. You can only do that with an EverTune, definitely. Yeah.
Well, and I think I saw the performance that you're maybe referencing, and was that with Chris Cornell on the Letterman show? Yeah. And it sounded so solid, and that was just a great performance, by the way, and a vocal of a lifetime from Chris. And then who's the other singer?
Joy Williams from the Civil Wars.
Yep. So, and that, I mean, talk about nerve-wracking. Live TV, you get one shot, right? And if you're going to be out of tune with that, I would assume that would haunt you forever.
It will. Yeah, it definitely will. Yeah. And so the way that came about, I played on these records for the Civil Wars. They had 2 records out when they were a duo. And then Chris Cornell ended up doing this duo with Joy Williams from the Civil Wars. And it was a song he had written for the movie, I always mess the name up, 12 Years a Slave.
I believe that's it. Yeah.
And it's an amazing song. And the changes are amazing. And I got to record it with him in the studio. And I used this Les Paul with the EverTune bridge. And used this in the studio for that song, because it was an F. And I wanted to get some open G ringy stuff, so I played it out of a G position. And he was amazing in the studio. He was very chill, very tall. Holy crap, he's really tall. He was really tall. And very open to getting hammered by me, questions about Soundgarden and Super Unknown album, and where he gets his writing inspiration from. I was like, where do these chord changes come from? Yeah,
seriously.
The name of the song is called Misery Chain. And you can go on, and it was on the David Letterman show, and check out the changes there for anybody that's watching this. And I asked him, I said, where does your chord sense and your chord progressions come from? And he goes, well, from listening to the Beatles. And I was like, I listened to the Beatles. I didn't get that.
So do I. And I mean, if you look at a tune like Black Hole Sun, just the intro goes through several key centers and tonal centers. Right. And again, it works perfectly. And yet if you analyze it, you're going, this shouldn't work at all, right? Like how did this happen? And so, I'm a big fan. I always loved his singing, but I really liked his guitar playing too. And
I loved his guitar playing. And you know what? I told him about the EverTune, because this one song they had, The Day I Tried to Live, it's basically a guitar strung, I think with plain unwound strings, a bunch of E and B strings, and in the chorus. And I was like, man, that thing, the way you have it tuned and stuff, you could really use a EverTune guitar, an EverTune bridge on it. I was telling him about that. I'm not sure what he thought about that, but so we did the studio date with him. And then this is when David Letterman was still on the air, and got a call to go up to New York to play Letterman show with Chris and with Joy, and perform that with producer Charlie Peacock on keyboards. And so it was a no-brainer to take the Les Paul with the EverTune, because once you get to the Letterman, the Ed Sullivan Theater, and this was in writing. I saw it printed up that the thermostat was kept in the studio, was kept on 48.
You're not the first person to mention that. And why does it need to be that way? A lot of those studios are very cold.
Yeah. David Letterman felt that audiences were a little bit more, giddy or something, and a little more prone to laugh or something. Maybe they were trying to laugh to create body heat or something. I don't know. But here was the deal. The studio on the ground floor was at 48 degrees. We were about 3 floors up in this old building, old building with, you guessed it, with the old radiators, the radiant heat radiators. And in New York, if you've ever noticed, a lot of windows you can't open up very much. So the dressing rooms were burning hot, and we would try to get some air in, but they don't want you jumping out of the window. So it kind of opens up about that much.
Okay.
So you go from an overheated dressing room down to a 48-degree stage, like in an instant. All right, we're ready to go. And you go, okay, let's go. And you have a Les Paul tuned down a whole step on live TV with Chris Cornell. And I could have only done it with the EverTune. So
yeah, that's amazing. And it's, again, I don't know how people navigated it back in the day, because that's true on tour as well, where you can have an instrument in a cold hotel room, and then you're playing some smoking hot shed gig. Yeah. And what do you do? And
yeah, well, and a lot of times you leave your guitars out and you pick up a frozen guitar. By the way, while I'm thinking about it, of playing guitar in freezing weather, Keith Urban here in town would host the New Year's Eve gig downtown. We have the big note drop here in Nashville, and Keith hosts it. And so his guitar player for a lot of years, Danny Rader, would play those gigs, and he asked me about, we were on a session together, and he asked me about the EverTune, and I was like, man, you can be in freezing, you can take it from hot to cold, and it stays completely in tune. That next winter, I got a call from him, hey man, we got the New Year's Eve outdoor gig coming up, can I borrow an EverTune? He borrowed it like 3 years in a row to take downtown to play that gig. And what was funny, they did a cover of Tom Petty's Free Fallin', which is a lot of fretted and open strings ringing together to kind of get the 12-string thing. He said Free Fallin' had never sounded more in tune, whether they were indoors or outdoors. He loved it. So that's a good testimony.
Yeah, he needs to get in touch with us. Okay. I know a guy.
Okay, yeah,
that's great. Well, this is it's been an education. I've heard you're playing for ages. It's great to be able to pick your brain on this stuff. And yeah, if there's ever anything you need from EverTune, you know where you can find us. Because you're a great ambassador for the brand. We're very, very grateful for that.
Well, it just works. And I got to tell you, I wear my bridges out. So I've got that little guy.
Yep, I got one of those too.
So when I'm on a session, if I do need to retune, like say I want to use the Les Paul on a half-step song, I just pop it in there and I give it about 9 turns.
Yeah.
And if I'm tuning down, I'll turn the tuning peg just a little bit, about a half of a turn or a third of a turn, and then hit about 9 real quick, do the next string, and usually it's pretty much dead in, and then I'll fine tune that from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it just works, and it's such, for the pace that we record here in town, it's amazing, and then taking it on the road with the different conditions that you come up against, it's it works. Yeah.
Well, I saw an interview that you did one time where you said you get this question a lot. People will ask you, if you put an EverTune bridge in your guitar, does it change the sound of it? And I loved what your answer was. How did you answer that?
Well, I probably said, yeah, it changes it. It's in tune finally.
It sounds real different when it's in tune.
Yeah, like I have a 335, a 1960 335, and it doesn't have an EverTune, but when it's out of tune, it sounds like a $2,000 guitar or a $200 guitar. So if you, whatever guitar you have, if it's out of tune, you can take a 0 off or 2 zeros off what it sounds like. And I've been on sessions where it's a kind of a rough and tumble thing. I can still bend with the EverTune, And I'll even pop a couple of strings intentionally out of tune just for the string, you know, for the warble and everything. So it gives me the options of being perfectly in tune or consistently out of tune.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, definitely. Well, again, this has just been a delight. I really appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, I look forward to hearing what you got going. I'm positive there's going to be plenty of good music coming.
All right. Hey, and Matt, real quick, do you recognize who's on my shirt?
I'm only seeing red and blue. Oh, yeah, there you go. That is hilarious. Well, people that won't be in on the inside joke, you and I were just riffing on Martin Van Buren the other day because it was President's Day. And
yeah, and and I told you, those first 2 albums of Martin Van Buren, they still mean so much to me.
Oh my gosh, well, you just won the irony war there. So congratulations. All right, Jerry McPherson, thank you once again, man.
All right, thank you, Matt. Enjoyed it.